This probably is the greatest picture of that era of musicians I think ever taken. And I'm so proud of it because now it's all over the United States, probably the world.
I was a young boy, see?
As I recall, it was very
Early in the morning, 10 o'clock or something like that.
It was like a family reunion, you know, being in one spot with all these great jazz musicians at one time.
I mean, what we call big dogs. I mean, the giants were there.
Prayers.
Monk.
I looked around and there was Count Basie,
Bach,
Charlie Mingus,
Stuff Smith,
Dizzy Gillespie, Jerry Mulligan. I said,
What a lineup.
Can you imagine if everybody had their instrument and played?
Back in 1958, when New York was still the jazz capital of the world, you could hear important music all over town, representing an extraordinary range of periods and styles. This film is the story of a magic moment when dozens of the greatest jazz stars of all time gathered for an astonishing photograph.
This thing all started, I guess, in the summer of 1958, at which time I was not a photographer.
Art Kane went from this day to become a leading player in the field of photography. This was his first picture.
I was an art director, and a fairly well-known art director. I was art director of 17 magazine. And
he was one of the 2 or 3 really great young art directors in New York at that point. Henry Wolfe and Art Kane and 1 or 2 other people were really considered the bright young Turks.
Robert Benton had not yet become a celebrated Hollywood filmmaker. He had only just become Esquire's new art director, hoping to please his jazz fan boss with an idea for an all-jazz issue. But his inexperience, combined with Kane's inexperience, gave us this historic document.
I was new enough and dumb enough in those days that I was willing to try all sorts of risky things.
So Benton suggests to, I guess it was Harold Hayes, who was the editor at the time, hey, why don't we give Art Kane a chance? He's never worked before professionally, but he's got a lot of talent, and he loves jazz, you know.
I called Art and asked him if he would come and talk to Harold and photograph this section.
So I suggested that we start this story off with a gigantic spread whereby we get together every jazz musician we can possibly assemble.
But instead of doing it in a controlled situation of a studio...
I didn't have a studio. I was not even a professional photographer. A studio.
Art then said he wanted to do it up in Harlem.
That's where jazz came in New York.
That was the moment where I began to get very nervous, because we will never be able to control this up there.
And so began a great day in Harlem.
Ah, yeah.
Do you remember anything about how you got there, Dizzy? Who told you to come and how you showed up so early?
No.
Whatever you remember about the day this picture was taken, how you happened to be standing up there with those guys?
Honey, I try to forget it.
I was staying up in 153rd Street, right across from where Coleman Hawkins lived. I probably took a taxi down, or I don't know.
I came with Taft Jordan and the gentleman on my left. We all came together, and I stayed till about 2 hours, I guess, and I had to go to work.
Nat Hentoff had come around saying, if you want to have your picture taken for Esquire magazine, be at Lenox Avenue and whatever it was, 125th Street, I think.
This was a remarkable idea, and that's why I showed up there. I was so fascinated with the idea that I say, I can't believe all these people are going to show up. There they were.
What time was it called for? I can't remember. About 11?
10.
That's early.
That's probably why I didn't believe anybody would show up.
In those days, you know, most musicians, and myself especially, get to bed, say 4 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, one didn't go to sleep immediately. It took a long time thinking of the day's happenings. And so you'd wake up as a rule, 12 or 1, ravenously hungry, go out to have something to eat and wonder, you know, what you were going to do with the long day coming.
was hanging around with Willie Lyon Smith by that time. So I came down with him, and then it was only later on that I realized that this was for Esquire and who most of the rest of these people were. Because at that time I was really only interested in stride piano. When you hear voicing like this, was one of the first stride pianists.
Lucky was, in his time, a legendary pianist. There was nobody who had the reach and the imagination. I mean, the Lion was good, but Lucky was the stride pianist.
He was 5'2" or 5'4" or something. He was very short, but he was very powerful. There was a story, he was a gymnast earlier on. And there was a story that was reported in Rudy Blesch's book, They All Played Ragtime, that Lucky Roberts was walking alone at night, and these young thugs were going to mug him. And he succeeded in grabbing both of them, breaking their bones, and dragging them into the police station.
I don't know why they picked this particular street or this brownstone, but that was the case. And here's my dear friend Scoville Browne.
I think I was residing at Pop Collins' house, which was a notorious home for musicians where you could come, eat, and sleep for a reasonable sum. I think his dinners were 35 cents a piece, and they were out of sight. And the rooms might have been, let's see now, rooms might have been $8 or $9 a week.
It was important for me to live in New York because I was just building a reputation for myself, and the record companies are here, and the booking agents are here, and all the clubs are here, and plus all the inspiration.
Because living in New York at that time, you saw everybody, everyone there. You're allowed to run into them any day.
It is true that we all had more chances to get together in those days.
As I say, we were up all night. I don't know one person who was not up all night because they were all very busy playing, you know. And the extraordinary thing about this picture is that there are so many innovators.
I was working with Thelonious at this period, and we were working in the 5 spot. And so that's probably how I heard about it.
Well, Bob Altshuler was the publicity guy at Riverside Records, and he was in charge of getting Monk.
I received a phone call from Esquire magazine to see whether it might be possible to arrange to bring Thelonious Monk on a certain date for a special photograph that was going to be taken. And knowing how difficult Monk can be.
I figured out Monk had this facade, the way he walked around, looking like maybe Jomo Kenyatta. And people are afraid to speak to him, you know? And he'd do certain things, eccentric type things, you know.
I really loved Monk. I hung out with him because he had higher morals than any man I ever met.
Really?
He was something else. And he always told the truth. If you want to know something and you ask him a question, if you're ready for the answer, he's going to tell you the truth. And that's what people don't like. That's why they were afraid of him.
Well, okay, so I made my request, and I guess a week or so later, it happened. There it was. They all assembled under the 125th Street, New York Central Railroad Station. Next thing you knew, I was standing there watching them all move in to that street. The only thing is I couldn't control it because you had musicians who hadn't seen each other in one solid congregation probably ever before. And to try to control this group was near impossible. You know, they were talking and they were laughing and they were paying attention to anything and anyone but this idiot kid across the street who has the audacity to set this whole thing up.
It was like old home week. The photographer was trying to get us in the picture that was similar to this up on the steps. He wanted to get us in this kind of a picture. And he would say, "Gentlemen, will you all please get up here?" And these guys that hadn't seen one another for ages, they were all shaking hands. "Hey, baby, how you doing? How you been?" You know.
Well, it was a really incredible environment to wander into. They had to walk down 126th Street and all your pals and buddies, and
they were just people that you knew and hadn't seen or wanted to see. And I had my camera, like I always do.
Oh, well, to the picture, yes. Milt brought his camera to the picture, and he wanted to get in the picture, so he asked me to take a few for him, which I did. In fact, some of his best shots might have been when I took them. I mean, I'm patting myself on the back, but that's about probably the way it happened.
And I just began to say, well, let me just capture some of this the way I see it, the way these guys are.
Very good photographer, Milton is. So we interchanged. He would take some and I would take some. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Mona was there. I think she took a few.
Well, I had this little Keystone 8mm movie camera, and Mona was not too much interested in photography. I said, "Honey, just aim it and press the button."
I mean, I wasn't that knowledgeable about what I should have been taking, but it was evident that many of them had not seen each other recently, so it was kind of nice.
I never felt so alone in my life that this, on the other side of the street, watching all of this, looking at my heroes and heroines with awe and realizing, okay, Kane, you know, this is it. You did it. Now it's your responsibility. You're going to make it happen. I grabbed a copy of the New York Times and twisted it into a megaphone shape and put it up to my mouth and yelled and begged, "Please, please, can you please try to form some kind of a formation? Can you move on into the steps of that brownstone?" And little by little, I mean, that was all I could do. It's like asking a baby to talk. I had one incredible assistant with me. It was a guy named Steve Frankfurt.
I was always starstruck, and Art to me was a star. He may have been a beginning photographer, but I didn't know from that. I was his kid. And when he called me and asked me if I'd become his assistant, I thought, wow, this was it. You know, I was working for Cecil B. DeMille. He had everything but the boots. I rushed out of the agency that morning. It was an early shoot. He asked me if I'd come up and load film for his cameras.
And he was about as inept as I was. I mean, neither one of us really knew what we were doing.
And I kept thinking, well, you're going to get 10 or 12 people. That's all you're going to get, and it's not going to work. And suddenly, people began to come, and they kept on coming, and it was astounding.
On the appointed day, I learned that Gigi Grice wanted to accompany us. And so Gigi came to the office, and then we proceeded to go up on the west side and stop at Monk's home to pick him up.
It was very early. I think most of these guys had never seen early morning. I mean, they were, somebody, I forget who it was, said they didn't realize that there were two 10 o'clocks in the same day. And they were absolutely, you know, they were kind of waking up, and it was and all focused, or trying to focus, on that kid across the street with the camera. Focus on that kid across the street with the camera.
Like water seeks his own level. All the piano players began to get over here and shake hands. All the drummers were over here, and the trumpet players, Roy Eldridge and Rex Stewart, all of these guys over in the corner, Dizzy Gillespie, all laughing and talking. It was just sheer happiness.
I was not on a big, generous expense account. The meter kept running, of course. Could never turn the meter off. And we kept waiting and waiting. And finally, after about an hour and 10 minutes, I was concerned we were going to miss the photograph. Thelonious Monk came out wearing a lovely sport jacket. Made no explanation as to why he was late. And in fact, on the entire trip up to Harlem, the only person that he talked to was G.G. Grice.
Monk didn't talk much, you know, like musicians run their mouths like that. But most of the time when you say something to Monk, Nellie would answer. I say, Monk. So Nellie said, well, I said, Nellie, Monk speaks English. Yeah. In a weird way, but it speaks English, but I have to say that.
He was the type of person where you have musicians who are always gossiping anyway, running their mouths. And Monk would walk around the room while everybody's blah, blah, and may not say a word for maybe 20 minutes. He'd just walk around stroking his little beard, you know. And then all of a sudden he may say 3 or 4 words and destroy everything we had been talking about for the last half an hour. He's completely washed it out, just like that. Timing.
Later, I managed to pull G.G. Grice aside, and I found out why we had to wait so long. Apparently, knowing that so many people were going to be in a photograph, Monk wanted to ensure that he would be seen. And he had to think about what he was going to wear. And apparently he was trying on a lot of different combinations. He came to the conclusion that most people, since they saw this as a special occasion, would probably wear a dark suit. So he elected to wear a light-colored jacket. And if you look at the photograph, he also, in his own knowing way, decided to stand next to 2 lovely ladies, Marion McParland and Mary Lou Williams.
Mary Lou was very fond of Monk.
Yeah.
Mary Lou.
Monk was fond of her, too.
Yeah.
She taught him. She taught me.
She taught you lessons?
Different things. No lessons. You know,
Yeah.
you play with them and they teach.
Yeah.
They tell you what's going on.
Yeah.
I really admired and revered Mary Lou and her playing. I always had before I ever met her.
In Kansas City, there's a pretty gal named Mary Lou, and she plays the piano in a manner that is ultra new.
Oh, I heard her records, and actually I started to learn some of her music. I play some of her things.
When you hear the saxes ride, who's the reason why they glide? It's the lady who swings the band.
Maybe almost her first job was with Andy Kirk and his Clouds of Joy, which of course was a wonderful band. And some of her arrangements that she made for that band, like Walking and Swinging was one. They were really great when you think she was only about 16 or something like that.
She was the first woman to get status in the band as more than just the chick, because she wrote arrangements for the Andy Kirk band, the best arrangements they had.
Of course, Mary Lou was, I think she transcended all remarks about women musicians. I mean, she just was a great musician. Fantastic. And always on the cutting edge of playing. I mean, she would delight in coming up with something that would amaze Bud Powell and Monk and all those people.
I had a lot of fun with Mary Lou, and we used to go up there, Monk and I and Bud Powell and the Steer Powell.
They all loved her and spent a lot of time up at her apartment, 63 Hamilton Terrace.
And get a lot of wisdom from her. She's a wonderful person. There's Oscar Pettiford.
That's right. Tell me about him.
The Pettiford family.
Yeah.
I had some of them play in my band. He on teams, alto play. He had a whole family of musicians. And Oscar was playing bass then, but he played a big tuba, and he had to lay on the floor and play on the stage.
Oh, yeah. Oscar Pettiford was one of the guys, a musician, that to get into his instrument and to perform, he'd break. One time he was playing softball and broke his hand out in the park. And so that's when he started playing cello. He wouldn't let nobody outplay him. He'd break his neck to play.
I could think of a million stories with Oscar. He was one of the greatest. Rex Stewart, a big idol of mine. These people were like giants. I could even never get to meet them or anything.
I told Taft on the way down, I just want to, meet Rex Stewart. That's the only. I think I must have stepped all over Coleman Hawkins and the rest. I didn't pay him no attention. I just wanted to meet Rex Stewart. I always considered it like, hey, this guy is not going to get the note on time. The band will be playing. I said, this guy ain't going to make it, but he always made it.
This little guy kept going over and grabbing Rex's horn, and Rex gave him the horn. He said, here, my horn. And the kid took it, and the great thing was that the kid took it, and he went, obviously it doesn't come out that way. And he couldn't figure out the magic of what made this thing make sound, and he picked it up and he blew it. And everybody, that sort of got everybody's attention.
At the time, I really didn't deserve to be on that picture. I hadn't played one job in New York yet. I used to carry Joe Jones's drums around, and I was overwhelmed being a young man. I hadn't been in New York that long, and seeing all these great musicians who I idolized.
I grew up listening to their records and idolizing them, and many times copying their solos off the record, trying to learn how to play. And all of a sudden, to be thrown in with them and to play with them was a great honor and a great blessing.
When you got there, Johnny, did you see a lot of people you knew?
I'm looking at them right now, sure. Because up there on the top with me there's Chubby Jackson, Wilbur Ware, Art Farmer.
Art Farmer worked with my band, for a while.
Horace Silver. Most of the guys were closer to my age. I knew really well. The other people, of course, I knew as idols and also as contemporaries in a way, but they were my idols, especially Coleman and Lester Young.
Coleman Hawkins.
And Dizzy, of course, was there.
Coleman Hawkins came back to the United States, and he surrounded himself with all of the young lions, at different times. He had Miles in his band one time, me in his band with little Benny, Kenny Dorham, all the young guys that were the main source of that music of that time. Coleman Hawkins surrounded himself with that, and he just was bursting open. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Coleman is my idol.
And when did you meet him?
Well, Gene, this is another story. When I was a small kid, I used to go to his doorstep. He used to live at the King Haven up in 153rd, so I would stand there with the 8x10 glossy, one of the James J. Kriegsman glass. So I would stand there and wait for him to come in, at night. I'd be there sometime, a long time. Or so finally he'd come home, and I'd, ask him what he signed, autograph, able to really get a chance to play with him, you know, and work with him.
Is that why you took up the tenor?
Probably so. I like the alto, but after listening to him, I wanted to play tenor, you know. Yeah, so he was sort of my all-time idol, really.
Of course, the name that comes to mind first is Coleman Hawkins. Both he and Lester Young were the two premier tenor saxophonists of the day, I think, and of all time, I would think.
You see, in Chicago, musicians came up. The young musicians tend to emulate Lester Young, play all of his soul, because that's the music from Kansas City is the music that we listen to.
The guys on the block told me, there's one guy that said, Sonny, who's the world's greatest tenor man? So I said, Coleman Hawkins. So I said, no, he's not. Lester Young is. So I said, who's Lester Young? So then I found out about Lester, you know.
You know, I used to practice every day with Lester Young records. I used to get my horn out, and in my living room, you know, the old 78 records, you know, I'd put them on the turntable and put President's records on. And then there was a hallway going up to the attic. And I used to get in that hallway, because when I blew my horn in that hallway, it was like an echo chamber, you know, and the sound would just come back all in my ears. And I'd play with the President's record and, you know, try to copy what he was playing and try to get that sound.
Was he one of the most original people you ever met?
Definitely. Completely original. A gem.
He held the tenor saxophone out in a horizontal position, much like a flute player would hold it up. And his tone was unique. Everything about Lester Young was completely unique, different, and original. The way he wore his clothing, his hat, for instance, that pork pie was identified with him.
Wardrobe, language, everything about him, just completely an original. Just like he really came from another planet for a short visit and then went back, you know, it's just fantastic.
When I worked with him, he told me that when he was called into Fletcher Henderson's band to take Coleman Hawkins' place, that all the guys in the band were laughing behind his back when he get up to solo, because his style was so different, you know. And he said that Fletcher Henderson's wife, she played the trumpet, and she used to come and wake him up every morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and get him and drag him down to the basement of the house there or something, and play Coleman Hawkins records for him and say, now this is the way you're supposed to sound, you know. He said, well, no, not me, that's okay for him, but this is me, you know. Thank God that he had the strength to withstand all of that and still hold on to what he believed in, you know. Otherwise, the whole train of tenor saxophone playing would have been lost. We wouldn't have Gene Ammons, we wouldn't have Dexter Gordon, we wouldn't have Stan Getz, we wouldn't have Al Cohen and Zeus Sims and Alan Eager and all the rest that followed, you know.
Back here, Prez, Lester Young.
That's right.
I was there to load film, which was very funny. Art wasn't a photographer, he says, ha. He was born a photographer. I didn't know beans about the mechanics of what it takes to put film in a camera. And he asked me to come up and load the film, which is indicative of what an amateur he was. And I'll never forget, I loaded that first roll, and I pulled the stuff out of the cartridge here, and I rolled it in backwards.
I brought my camera to this event, not knowing that much about it, but I always carried my camera with Willie because you never knew what was going to happen. Well, then I recognized Lester Young and Thelonious Monk, and of course Count Basie.
I didn't have a wide-angle lens on it, just a 50mm lens on it. But I stepped back, as you can see, and there's Jimmy Rushing over there, and a very young, beautiful Maxine.
Maxine Sullivan was the genius in that she knew something like 200 verses of songs. When I say the verse to the person who may not know what I mean, the lyrics, verses to lyrics, an extraordinary thing, because one either just sang the melody to the chorus, and that was it. But she knew and remembered all these things.
Thank you for asking me to sing. It's mighty sweet of you, so let that music swing. Some of these days you'll miss me, honey. Some of these days you'll feel so lonely. You'll miss my hugging, you'll miss my kissing, you'll miss me, honey. When you're away, I feel so lonely.
This was a style at that time, I remember. Now, she had gone to Hawaii. And the reason why I can remember this date is because when she came home, I remember I knew how to say Merry Christmas in Hawaiian, you know, and we all were eating with chopsticks and wearing mandarin shirts, the whole bit. She's standing in front of Jimmy Rushing, and we had a Cocker Spaniel.
Jimmy Rushing, he was married to a lady that lived on our block.
James Rushing?
Oh, I know him. Yes.
Jimmy Rushing.
I left my baby standing in the back door crying. Yes, I left my baby standing in the back door crying. She said, son, you've got a home as long as I've got mine.
Jimmy's wife had a Cocker Spaniel, a female, and we had a male Cocker Spaniel. And Jimmy's Cocker Spaniel had no puppy, so they brought him over to our house, supposedly to mate. one summer.
A jazz wedding.
A jazz wedding, that's what it was, a jazz wedding.
Well, that ain't no love, that ain't no getting along.
And there's Joe Thomas, a great trumpet player, and Oscar Pettiford is looking over at me because I got the camera and smiling.
And I handed the camera to him, and he almost threw it at me. And he said, what the hell are you doing? He said, we got 59 guys here who've never been together in their lives. He said, and you're giving me film upside down. I really didn't realize it. And I took it back, we redid the film all over again, and then it restarted. And it was that kind of a morning.
I really felt like I was very lucky because I finally knew what was going on. So I stood next to the Esquire photographer. I figured if I stand next to him, I'm going to get good shots. And so here's this other photographer. They went through all this time. I don't know if they paid any of these people anything for showing up. I have a suspicion they didn't. In any case, here are all these people showing up, and they went through the effort, and I'm standing. I just show up and take pictures too, but I didn't have to go through the trouble and research of getting everybody there.
The other thing that I remember so vividly was the screaming and yelling that was going on up above from the windows, because there were kids up there yelling. One of them had a brother down here, kept screaming at him.
And this man is trying to get us organized, and nobody's paying him any attention at all.
There were a lot of mini dramas going on in that group. All I could do was stand and watch it happen. It was kind of like, I don't know, like oil and water, you know, projected. You just watch it flow.
And somebody here in the picture kept always looking up, and of course Art was losing the eyes when that would happen.
And he said, gentlemen, please, will you get up on the stage, get up on the steps? And these guys over there talking. I see all these piano players over here. I see Basie sitting on the stoop. He's gotten tired of standing, so he's sitting down on the curb with a bunch of little kids. And I said, well, this is great. I got to get this.
I remember when Art asked, when he looked over and saw that Basie was sitting on the curb and playing with his hat. And there was a little kid, it was this kid, his name was Leroy, I remember it. And he kept going over and grabbing the hat. And Basie kept taking the hat back from him, and the kid would come over and grab the hat again.
Basie is the one man, I must say, I had never heard say a disparaging word about anyone. He was a fantastic person. And he wasn't, say, the pianist that Fats or Lucky Roberts or James P. was, but he had something that it was so simple and so real, and everything he did swung.
I noticed all of a sudden Count Basie decides to sit down at the curb. Great. Sits down at the curb, and next thing I knew, about 10 or 12 kids that lived on the street decide to sit down next to him. In fact, it was probably one or two just wanted to sit next to the Count. And then the rest of them, you know, to get a little more nerve. And next thing you know, the whole curb was lined with these kids, and it was Count Basie as, you know, one bookend on the far right.
No, it wasn't quite that easy.
And the way he was told.
I was, just prior to this picture, I got into a scuffle with the boy I'm sitting next to.
Juvenile delinquent.
I hear maybe he's the one that turned out to be a boxer. I got him early. But for me, you know, at that time, I must have been 4 or 5 years old. I was running around with the neighborhood kids, you know, I was oblivious to all the hoopla that was going on.
Instead of shooing these kids out of the shot, he was wise enough to say, use it, use all of the accidents.
The picture became a movie. I mean, it was a still, but it was really a living thing.
Roy Eldridge told me about this picture. He said Dizzy always does that to him. Whenever he has a picture taken, he says something funny to him, he turned around, and they didn't get his face. He said he told Dizzy that 1,000,000 times. He always does that to me on pictures.
I think that picture is more expressive for him than
he
if he
said
had
Dizzy always says something to him.
I understand that. But that looks more like Roy than if he had turned around, I think.
If you knew Roy Eldridge, you'll understand what I mean when I say that, because he has he had a lot of complexes, as great as he was.
Well, anyway, you see a picture with Roy and me together, we will be together on a picture.
Roy Eldridge, when I was still living in Phoenix, Arizona, he came through town with Artie Shaw's band, and he came to the little joint that I was playing in. They had a night off, and he came there, and I must have been about 15 years old, and I knew nothing. But he was such a great guy, and he loved to play so much that he came up on the stand and played the drums. And he played the drums for about an hour, and then he went to his room and got his horn, and came back and played his horn with me. And we had a great time.
Roy, of course, was one of the finest trumpet players that I've ever had the pleasure of hearing. It seemed that when Roy was playing a solo, every chorus that he played, you know, was his range on the trumpet was very great. And he would seem to play higher and higher with each succeeding chorus until he reached a point where you'd think, well, he can't go any higher, but they need to go higher, you know. This was the way he played. A fantastic player.
Right there, wasn't he?
You know, this is right there with Roy, you know, which is a good pairing. Roy was like the forefather of Dizzy in a certain sense.
That's the guy. I never did listen to Louis Armstrong. I didn't have any of his records, anything, but Roy Eldridge was mine. Man, they used to play from the Savoy. They used to tap at the... I didn't even have a radio. The lady next door had one of those radios that it looks like the front of a church. Yeah, with a little thing here, you know. I don't know, you don't remember it.
This is really to me, this is really my favorite photo. This, for the simple reason that I was speaking before about water seeks its own level. Here, and all of these guys are here, and here, all of the drummers are in one spot. And there's Paul Whiteman's great drummer, George Whitland standing there. And there's Papa Joe Jones with his magnificent smile and his regal look, Count Basie street drummer. Next to him is Gene Cooper, who was Benny Goodman's drummer. And to the right of him is Sonny Greer, who was Duke Ellington's drummer. Behind Sonny Greer to the left is Dewey Singleton. Who was with Louis Armstrong in the Hot 5 or Hot 7 or whatever that was. And then back at the top right above Zudi is Art Blakey.
This is American music. You know, and don't get it confused. It's the greatest thing in the world. I go all over the world, get all kind of honors. Why? Because I play American music.
There isn't one person in this picture who wasn't a featured soloist. And all good guys, good friends, no jealous egomaniacs.
Each of these people in this shoot had a presence, an immediate presence, before they even picked up their horn.
Well, I'm sure there's all jazzes in the genes, and it's always there. It just needs to be, it just needs the right soil to grow in, you know. Yeah. You know, it's there already. It just needs to be nurtured, you know.
And my wife put it this way, and I think she's right. They're literary figures as well as jazz figures. When you look at their lives, I mean, not only they know so much, but they're so free in spirit.
I think mainly it's that guys sort of live very hard and they
it's a hard life.
Surrender themselves to just the art, which is in a way it's understandable. You know, so I mean, what's the point in living to be 100 if you don't do anything in life, you know? So when I look at some of these great people like Vic Dickenson.
There are some marvelous trombone players, obviously, but I always prefer to listen to Vic Dickenson. He had such sly wit and such original variations on melody, and of course his pulse was just extraordinarily accurate. And you have an artist like Vic, and of course you could name all kinds of people, and they're not known to all but a few aficionados and collectors in this country, better known in France and England and Japan.
And many of them unsung during their lifetime.
Now, Vic lived at 1312 Stebbins Avenue, which became later on the house that Jazz built when we set up our community center in the Bronx. And I can remember doing chores for Vic on the weekends, on Saturdays, washing his windows and doing other things around the house for $1.
Rudy Powell, who's sitting here next to Oscar, his son and I went to PS 89 together.
Let me see. I remember, well, I had forgotten Sonny because I ran into him down in a repair shop, and I asked him, you know, Rudy Powell? I said, yeah, I know Everard, too. Well, the only one guy I know Everard as well is me.
We later moved up on the hill where Lucky's was, up on 149th Street, up on Sugar Hill, where all of the great musicians lived.
Nice! Watch it, little fancy couple this time. Whap, whap.
Henry Red Allen lived right around the corner from us on Freeman Street in the Bronx.
Henry Red Allen? Remember him?
Red Allen. I used to love to go hear him. I never played with him, but I used to love to go hear him.
He was at a place called the Metropole, very loud place, and they'd all be standing in a long line on this bandstand.
Most people saw him as a showman. He would shout during numbers and get the crowd involved and all that stuff.
Sister McPartland and whoever he knew in the audience, he was such fun.
He came from New Orleans. He had broken in with his father's brass band. He was one of the few trumpet players of that age and that background who influenced modern players like Miles Davis. And Miles had a lot of respect for him, but most people didn't know that because all they saw was Red whomping and, well, how they used to put it, whamp, whamp.
Whamp, whamp.
For all the showmanship, he was extraordinarily shy and very correct. Always in suit and tie, no matter what time of the day, as you can see in that music.
Oh, that's Pee Wee Russell.
It's so remarkable to look at this picture because I listened to the music of these musicians throughout the week. The other night I listened, for instance, Henry Allen is here, one of my favorite trumpet players of all time. And the music of these people continues to live, continues to be a permanent part of our life.
The spontaneity is what makes the music so continually fresh. And while you can listen to a Louis Armstrong or a Lester Young record that was made 30, 40 years ago, and you don't think of the passage of time. It is the immediacy of what that person was thinking and feeling at the time.
And for one incredible moment, shoom, every eye was into that, or everyone but one.
I don't think that anybody, including Art, realized when he hit that shutter really quite what he had done. First of all, it was something that would never happen again. You know, you can wait around and hope, and you'll never see the likes of this again, and that's what it was about.
One of the things that I learned about movie directing from Art in this shot is that finally, you don't tell everybody what to do. You let them do what they're going to do naturally, because that's what's going to work.
Look how young Sonny Rollins looked. And Mingus looked young, too.
I think of all the musicians I've known well, Mingus was by far the most interesting because he was so protean. He had so many changes.
Hey, Rodney. Don't stop now, man. Hope you don't mind. I just walked in.
Liberty Hall. Be right with you.
Not only in his music, which was one of the things that made it so compelling, but he himself. You never quite knew the kind of mood he was going to be in or why. He even would change shape from time to time. When he was bloated, he suddenly slimmed down and a whole new set of clothes and hats.
There's one of my favorite bass players, Charlie Mingus.
Charles Mingus. Charlie didn't like to be called Charlie. Charles.
He had this enormous immediacy of presence. And he had no patience with his musicians when they just coasted.
I see you got here first. Yeah, baby, and I'll be the last one to leave.
He wanted them to play his music the way he wanted it played, but then he wanted them to take out of that music their own kind of feeling. And he would stop performances in a nightclub and say, "No, I don't want to hear that. I heard you do that before. I want to hear something new." And he was a very open guy.
My man Charles.
Where's this other bass player friend of mine? Milt Hinton?
Milt Hinton today is much heavier than he is in this picture. You can't tell much about Jerry Mulligan because he's at the back there.
Hank Jones looked at this picture and he went through every one and he said, now his stomach is twice as big as it was when this picture was taken. And, you know, he mentioned Dizzy and all these people.
What did he say about me?
He said you looked exactly the same.
He wouldn't say that, sweetheart.
And I think the horn probably is at a more acute angle than it was. But I mean, he's a fine player. Horace Silver, his weight is approximately the same. He never gets any heavier or any, you know, he stays very much at the same weight level.
I eat vegetarian or semi-vegetarian. I eat a little fish, vegetables, fruits, fruit juices, vegetable juices, herb teas, and things like that. But I'm not a diehard, you know. Once in a while, I'll get a dream. I'll have a dream about a steak, you know, and I'll have this dream, and I'm eating this steak, and it's tasting so good, and the next day I get up and I go out and buy me a steak.
Horace, has this ever happened to you? 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you're dreaming, and this melody comes into your head, and it's so beautiful, you think, and you say, oh, I'll remember that, and I'll write it down when I get up in the morning, and the morning comes, and it's
You
gone.
lose it. It's gone. Oh.
Well, Horace,
oh, man.
This happened to me once, and I said, I'm going to get up. I got up, and I went down to the studio and said, I'm going to put it down and see what it is this time. And I wrote it down, and I went back to bed, and I said, in the morning, I'll get up and develop it. And when I got up in the morning, I went back down there, and I started playing it. I said, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. You know what it was? It was a verse to Stardust. What a disappointment.
Ernie Wilkins.
Ernie Wilkins, of course, is somebody I remember for so many years with his wonderful writing for Count Basie. And he wrote a beautiful arrangement for me, a big band arrangement on a tune that I wrote called Twilight World. And I understand that even since he had the stroke a couple of years ago, that he's getting better, he's out in the wheelchair and writing again.
Here's my all-time favorite, Stuff Smith.
Who?
Stuff Smith?
Oh, Stuff was a dear friend. I'll never forget when we had, you might have been there.
Oh, Stuff Smith, yes.
You know Jonah Jones?
Yes, I know Jonah.
Jonah told me one day he was coming down Amsterdam Avenue, and this jukebox was playing like mad inside of this bar, and people were patting on, and he said, this cat came down the street, you know, Stuff. It was talking about Stuff. Stuff walked down the street, and he heard everybody in there playing, and he went and took out his fiddle and started blowing with the jukebox.
Yes.
Stuff was truly a very funny guy and didn't seem to take things terribly seriously. But he could really play. He was a marvelous player.
He really was a marvelous player.
I see that, if I may mention, there's I'm in the picture, and is that Pee Wee Russell?
Pee Wee lived at my house. Pee Wee came to Boston in 1929. I was working for Leah Reisman, and he stayed at my house.
Well, Pee Wee, as you may or may not know, was terribly nervous. He was a heavy drinker, and he'd begun to drink when he was a very young man.
My mother loved him, and my mother used to. This was in Prohibition days, and my mother they'd stay up all night drinking whiskey, and I'd say to my mother, "Where did you?" My mother was an old little Jewish lady. I said, "Where did you get the whiskey?" She says, "I have my connections."
But he was a marvelous player, I always thought. You never knew what he was going to play, and it was always such a pleasant surprise. And I do think, really, that if they're going to be 100 years from now, we'll hear more of Pee Wee Russell's playing than of Benny Goodman's, who was truly a great artist.
And when it was over, I don't know, it just packed up my gear. Steve and I took off. And I went back to the agency where I was working. Steve went back to his agency.
And he went on to become Art Kane. And I went on to become president of that agency.
I think after the picture was taken, we all went to Benton's Playhouse and hung around there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we'd go home.
Well, there were a lot of lingering conversations at the end.
We held up the actual taking of the picture for a while because Charlie Shavers wasn't there. And there was a lot of people who weren't there, but they hadn't taken the, you know, we got little notices what they're going to do. We're going to take pictures of all the musicians we can get. So they didn't take it seriously. They said, oh, listen, somebody going to take a picture.
If I start counting heads, and I think about how many people are no longer there anymore, it still comes as a shock to me because we don't think about people not being here. We think about, if we think about Lester Young, we don't think, yeah, well, Lester Young was here, but he's not here anymore. Lester Young is here. Coleman Hawkins is here, you know. Roy Eldridge is here. They are in us, and they will always be alive.
It's some famous picture, huh? It's a whole lot of people I like on here. Mm-hmm. Listen, I better call my wife.